Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's panel discussion slash webinar. This was a little more webinar than panel discussion, but you at the end can decide, was that a panel or a webinar, or what was this? So today, what we're going to talk about is securing home networks. I don't know about you all, but I remember when the pandemic began 20 years ago. And when that happened, like, we sent everybody home, and all of a sudden, we cared more about home networks than ever before. But we didn't really have time to focus on it because everybody just went home. It's not like we armed everybody with all of the right information and then said, go home. No, everybody went home. So today, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about what we've learned. And I was kidding about the 20 years, sort of. What we've learned in the last 2.5 years about the threats from home networks. We're going to talk about some bad outcomes from having remote workers. And we're going to, and when I say bad outcomes, I don't mean that you should bring everybody back to the office. I mean cyber attack, because hey, it's a cybersecurity webinar, and we'll send you home with a goodie bag at the end today. So work from home threats. So there are only two things a child will share willingly: communicable diseases and its mother's age. That was Benjamin Spock, Dr. Spock. No, Mike Simon, when we say Spock, we don't mean the guy from Star Trek. But one of the major threats in people's homes and home environments is, well, children. So a couple of things you need to know. Number one, the chat's on the right. Some of you are already saying hello. Some of you are saying live long and prosper. I'd love to know where everybody's joining from. So in the chat, tell us where you're joining from. You can mute the chat, and I'll show you how to in a second. If you are here, you will get a recording. Two things about the recording. Thing number one, somebody's here from Hawaii. Thing number one about the recording. It will send you a link that only you can use. We will also, in the email where we follow up with everybody, put a YouTube link. So if you want to share it out, you can use that one. We're going to talk about the problem. We're going to talk about solutions. And then we're going to give you a checklist of how, because what we assume here is that most of the people who came to the webinar are IT leaders, IT managers, folks who give other people advice. And so we're going to give you a checklist of things that you should be doing. Now, the chat. If you want the bloop, bloop, bloop from the chat to go off, what you do is you click the full screen button at the bottom. You then select the little more thing. You then mute all the notifications and then exit. Exit doesn't mean you're leaving. It just means you're leaving that view. Yes, we've talked to Livestorm, the company that does this platform, about making that easier. But hey, computers are hard, right? All right. So who are we? Many of you, I see a lot of familiar names. You know who we are. Critical Insight defends critical services against cyber attacks. We are your 24/7 security operations center. We do your professional services, risk assessments, pen tests. The goal here is to help everybody prepare for an attack, detect an attack quickly, and then respond right and respond rapidly when it happens. And that's really what we help organizations do. Started to think about it as cybersecurity as a service, but that's a conversation for another day. The conversation we're going to have today involves Mike Simon, who is our Chief Technology Officer, does battle with foreign governments. He can tell you all about that. He, as you can imagine, at home has a very complex home network. He starts telling me about his home network, and he loses me 3 words in. And we can talk about that a little bit. Elise Dennis is a senior consultant here at Critical Insight. She has 4 network threats at home, and by that I mean kids. My name is Jake Milstein. I'm the Critical Insight event host, and I have one very serious network threat, a teenage daughter. And so we'll be talking about that as we go. There are two stories of things gone wrong that we want to start here with. One is the laptop that came back. It's a bad bedtime story. So it's happened to an organization that we know well. They had somebody. They went home in the pandemic. A couple of months into the pandemic, somebody downloaded malware onto that computer. It was not detected, and it sat there and it waited. Do you remember when the first, like, hey, everybody return to work thing happened? So, for those of you in healthcare, I know you've always been back, but this is a different kind of place. And they brought it back, laptop plugged into the network, and boom, all of a sudden there was malware all over the network because they brought it back into the office environment. So that's one story. And then Mike, you're going to tell the story about the VPN gone wrong.
Yeah, it's very, very early during all of the pandemic stuff. Several pieces of advice that you saw from Microsoft and others was, and I have to sort of lean into this a little bit with some sarcasm, because what they said was, hey, you know what? Everybody's always said split tunneling is maybe a bad idea because it leaves that endpoint both on the internet and simultaneously on the internal network, that company network. Early days of the pandemic, they said, yeah, pay no attention to what we said before, split tunnel, because if you don't, with everybody already, just suddenly at home, if you don't, it's going to overwhelm our infrastructure. It's going to kill all of the endpoints, or actually kill the VPN endpoints. It turns out the original advice was still the best advice. In the case that I'm remembering, and there's been several of these, so it's like the most egregious case I'm remembering. Somebody with a split tunnel who had access to source code, actually very, very important, very, very secret source code for the company, exposed that source code directly to the attacker, who gained control of their computer through their direct access on the internet. So simultaneously being on the corporate network and having access to assets in the corporate network and being directly without mitigation on the internet can be a bad thing.
All right. And so those two outcomes are things we obviously want to avoid. And so we're going to talk about how to do that. Mike.
So the story that we want to tell here is really about the fact that you kind of have coworkers not chosen by your company. The people occupying your home and theoretically the network that your work computer is on are not folks that, had you invited them over for lunch to the corporate office, you would have had them plug into the corporate network without question. They're fine people. They're probably your family. But often that home network was not designed to be secure really in any very specific way, and certainly not secure as a container of corporate secrets. So that population includes just, as we've said, it includes people who work for other companies. It includes children. It includes people who may be connecting to resources such as school networks. So your work computer is on that network, hopefully configured with something called zero trust. We'll talk a little bit about what that definitionally is. If you look up zero trust on the internet, Google it, you'll find about 15 definitions. I'll go through the kind of more common one. Other work computers, obviously, with different policies. Side by side, you have, in my home, I have my work computer, and 30 feet away, a work computer for my partner that is configured using her company's policy. We'll talk a little bit about why that's a problem, or why it can be a problem. I think I've covered most of this IoT stuff. If you've got door locks and various different kind of random things hanging out on your network that are also on that same network, chat a little bit about what that means. And the other piece is whatever software is loaded onto all of those things. Your company policy probably limits what you can put onto your laptop. We don't have such limits on much of what's running around on our home networks. So it's really not an environment for solid risk management.
And by the way, and Mike, I love Peter's comment in the chat here, because I hadn't thought about it this way, but totally right. If you have two people in the same home doing work from home from two different companies, in some sense, that home network may be bridging those two companies.
Yeah, precisely so. If you've got, especially with VPNs on both ends, and if that's the Peter Gregory, I think it is, co-author with me on a couple of books. Welcome, Peter. Good to see you virtually.
And so, I mean, I think we see that as an issue. So, Mike, you created this network diagram. I think one of the things we want to call out at the top here is, you want your employees to become an island.
Yeah. So this is just a simplified version of probably the easiest way possible to partition your home network. That upper left personal work Wi-Fi device, in the simplest version of this, all that's doing is NAT. It's probably Wi-Fi, could be wired, don't really care, and it's performing network address translation. Yeah, so essentially a diode-like device for those of you that have electrical backgrounds. It's allowing traffic to go from you over there in the upper left through that device, and then probably just through the home network, not with home network destinations, through that home network to the internet. And that provides a certain level, a decent level actually, of separation between those other home users, lower right, and your little island over there in the upper left, in that work laptop. Now, if you've got more than one environment, more than one home worker, you may want to buy more than one of those devices. Or use a single device that has good separation. A firewall in that position actually would be ideal. And if you know how to configure firewalls, you can actually create that environment just using a pretty simple, fairly inexpensive device in that position. My guess would be somewhere between $50 and $150.
And so, Mike, Mark asks a question in the chat. What about a mesh network? The other thing that as we look at this, people's home networks sometimes, they don't know that much about their home Wi-Fi. They have CenturyLink, they have Comcast, they have Cox Cable, whoever they have, Cox, whatever Cox is calling their home internet product these days.
Yeah.
And the company has just shipped them stuff, and they plug it in, and they say, "Yeah, I have Wi-Fi now." How do you give them instruction on how to do this? Like, hey, you have to go out and buy this specific thing, or what do you tell them?
So mesh is near and dear to my heart, because for coverage in my home, I do have to have a mesh. Anybody here living in San Francisco, by the way? Anybody on the call in San Francisco?
Maybe.
San Francisco has an interesting issue. Many of the homes built in San Francisco back, I'm going to say at least 80 years ago, have chicken wire as the lattice supporting the plaster. That chicken wire creates a beautiful Faraday cage across every single room in your home. It is, in cases, almost impossible to get Wi-Fi from one room to another without line of sight and a mesh. So in that case, you obviously have a little more complex setup to create than single personal Wi-Fi that does your home office, possibly, except, is your home office moving around? Are you moving that laptop, or can you put it in one spot and maybe just have one Wi-Fi and a wired connection that goes upstream? The idea, though, would be to have whatever network your home computer is on, your home work computer is on, that it's the only thing on it. If you need other work devices, they would also participate in that same network, but keep them separate. My home, I have 3 mesh networks simultaneously running throughout the entire house, one of which is the CI network, one of which is the network that is my work computers.
And so, is it so, if somebody has like the Comcast, whatever Comcast gives you as an example, I don't, pick any large provider, and it has a choice of here's a guest network. It gives, you can have 2 networks. You have a guest network and you have a regular network. Can you tell your employees, we only want your computer on one of the networks and everything else goes on the other? Is that safe enough?
That is a level of separation. In general, it's not what I would recommend. That device is controlled by a third party. So if you wanted to introduce more parties into the party, that's a way to do it. They're also not necessarily well patched. They are a part of the IoT in your home. The better scenario would be to have something that's directly under your control that you configure. And the configuration for these doesn't have to be extensive. If you look at how we do work from home SOC, we actually have centrally configured devices that we can monitor centrally that cause this level of separation. And they're not Wi-Fi because we don't let our SOC be on Wi-Fi. That's kind of the extreme here, but you could do a $20-$30 device likely that would produce that level of separation. I wouldn't necessarily trust the customer premise equipment provided by your ISP to do that in a useful way. There's another discussion we can have that I'm going to limit this because I can go on for hours about it, and everybody in the company has dealt with that before, and that is, it also depends on the assets that you're protecting. Don't go overboard. Overboard is a hard to define moment here, but protecting things to the level that CI does isn't necessarily appropriate for everyone all the time.
Mm-hmm. Two questions came up in the chat here. One is, or is there a device that you specifically recommend for home usage, or a group of devices? And then what about MAC address filtering?
Both great questions. At a baseline level, anything that does NAT and does it properly. If you want it to be stable, I would pick a manufacturer that you've heard of before. And depending on your level of concern, maybe US manufactured. We use Ubiquiti's Edge Router for some of our more important separation. They have the advantage. They're a little expensive. They do have the advantage of being centrally managed with a decent level. We also monitor the heck out of traffic at that endpoint. So that's a kind of high-end solution, but there's a lot that are lesser so.
Mm-hmm.
MAC address it's insufficient against a certain level of threat. This came up actually just yesterday as we were talking about it inside a company meeting at CI. Almost half of the people on that call knew how to spoof MAC addresses.
Of course they did.
We actually had the same conversation with a client where they acknowledged that anyone could spoof a MAC address and bypass their current security. It's also something I wanted to mention really quick is we had a lot of clients approach us at the start of the pandemic saying, how do we make this work? How do we get people remotely working as quickly as possible? And I'm sure that this was a common problem for many, many organizations of all different types of sizes in every industry, was getting people to work from home as quickly as possible. And in most cases, these home connections were set up without any thought beyond how do we connect? How do we make this work? And now that things, remote work is not going away, this looks like something that is going to persist longer than the initial 14 days, 3 months, 1 year that we anticipated. Now is a great time to go back and reevaluate how those remote work models were deployed. And we'll get into some of the finer details around how we can do that. But I think it's never too late to go back and refine or improve or identify opportunities for improvement in the existing setups that employees have currently, as well as the company's technical controls around those connections.
Yeah, 100%. One of the reasons we waited until now to actually have this discussion was early days. Everybody had an idea, and it was really all about how do we keep working? How do we just make it kind of work as well as it can? We felt like, by now, of course, most of the dust is settled, and a lot of the issues are well established. So let's just kind of chat through what some of those look like.
And Mike, you brought up zero trust before, and Elise really wanted everybody to see the kitten on the keyboard.
Yeah, kitten was a requirement.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned kittens actually in our announcement for this. And I think many people would have complained if there were no kittens involved. So thank you for the graphic. So zero trust goes by a lot of names. Perimeterless, Beyond Corp is actually Google's branding of that. In its essence, it's simple. It's the Russian saying, and a lot of people don't realize this is actually originally a Russian saying, trust but verify, only converted to verify, never trust. The idea is that every device on a network is not assumed to be a trusted device. That you only use it and share secrets with it and share information with it after you've verified that in fact it is what it thinks it is, or what you think it is. And in the best of all worlds, it's also verified that you are in fact who you say you are. Seems simple-ish, and it is in concept. But also that applies to services, not just devices, but services that you interact with. So the endpoint is protected from attack, from network neighbors, because they are assumed not to be trusted. If just because it's sitting beside you, figuratively on a wire, doesn't mean it's a trusted device. In fact, it may have been, there may be malware running on that device right now, even though it's, a picosecond away from you in terms of data transmission time. So that's the base idea here behind zero trust. It's that the grander idea is there are no more perimeters. We just get rid of firewalls entirely, that they're not needed because we've protected every single endpoint at the level required as if you were going to expose it directly to the internet all day long, every day. In practice, firewalls are still pretty useful for a lot of different things. They do scrape off a lot of internet noise and allow us to focus a little bit more on those local threats. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. I'm giving the simplest possible definition. I can't remember the NIST there's a new NIST publication that defines zero trust from NIST's perspective. It's about 20 pages, so not long for something of theirs. It's worth a read. If anybody's interested, we'll dig up the link to it and put it into the chat or something that Jake shares with everybody.
I think it's also important just to mention that humans by nature want to trust everything because that makes our lives easier. So when you're enforcing this idea of zero trust and defaulting to never trust, it's going to be a huge shift in company culture, and you'll probably receive a lot of pushback, especially from folks who just want to focus on working and don't really have security concerns. So rolling these things out in stages, phases, and slowly and gradually throughout your organization is going to make this a lot more easily consumed by your audience. And having great process and policy in place to support that is also very critical.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, I was just talking to a city, and they were talking about how impossible it is to even roll out MFA because everybody just wants it to be easy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
easy is insecure.
Bad guys love easy. Mike.
Yeah, no, I was watching some of the chats go by. A lot of folks putting in how their company policy handles a lot of this, and those are fantastic measures to put in place. The level of controls that your company may have through firewalls at corp may be harder to enforce at the firewall that's remote from corp, and so that's a lot of where we try to go here. So who's in charge? Who is in control of the computers on your home network? We talked about that briefly earlier. Your corporate IT hopefully is in charge of what's going on your corporate laptop. That's great. And I'm going to, for the moment, just go past the ooh, scary hackers answer. Yeah, if malware is running on your home network, those folks are the ones that are actually in charge. Try to avoid that. We're focusing a little more here on just that, the things that are always going to be true if there's anybody but you on that network. So what level of access does that third party have to those computers? If you have a partner or just a roommate, somebody else on the network who works somewhere else, does that other IT department have direct access, like remote login access to that workstation, that other workstation? If they do, whoever that other IT department is, and it may even be outsourced IT, so now we're talking about it through at least 3 companies who are looking at and able to control data and a machine sitting theoretically next to yours on the home network. Whose policy rules here?
Mm-hmm.
This is going to come up as a theme ongoing, is like, if there's more than one company involved in that network, whose policy rules the day? And that should be explicit, should be known, because I guarantee you there will be lawsuits that call out all of the issues that we're talking about right now when certain kinds of breaches occur, and not having an answer will not be your best moment. So one thing that we discovered Defender does a while back is, without telling you or asking your permission, Defender for Endpoint can actually scan the rest of your network and look at what IP ports are open, because it wants to know. It's decent. It's a decent endpoint. We love it, but first time we saw that, it threw us for a loop. So the endpoint software running on that other computer that's not your work computer may be doing all kinds of stuff. It is trying to protect its endpoint. It's trying to understand the network it's on. It's doing XDR stuff. Some of the X in XDR might be doing things that your company policy really wouldn't appreciate when directed at you. The last piece, and this is one I think that Leith has more experience in kind of dealing with and understanding than I do, is all of what you're doing is probably being translated to a single outgoing IP address. Your activities, your teenagers' activities, the cat's activities, all of the things that are happening on your network are seen by some others as just one source of all of those things. If you've ever ticked off somebody online, or had your teenager tick off somebody online, not that Jake's ever would, that is seen in some ways as you.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. If you ever have an individual in your home that draws that type of negative attention or potential retaliation, whether that's in a chat room, an online gaming situation, or they just have an attractive social media handle that somebody else wants, your entire network is in scope for attack as far as that adversarial bad actor is concerned. And this has been shown over and over and over again in scary stories, which I'm happy to share if anyone's interested in hearing more about those. But they will look for information on you, information on your family, how to get in contact with you, physical address, phone numbers. Any device on your network is in scope for them to attack. They will, by any means necessary, exact revenge or retaliate, and they're not concerned with limiting that to the single party that caused the disagreement or the aggression in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a story about that. As many folks here know, I used to run newsrooms. And sometimes when you run newsrooms, there are people who don't like you. And so in the Seattle area, I had a group of Nazis come after me. Like swastika, yep, neo-Nazis. It involved the FBI coming to my house. It involved all sorts of things. But my wife, she was not the target. I was, but it's our network together. And so, my job was the one that got the scrutiny, but it affected everybody in the house. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that can go very, very poorly. So it's just something to keep in mind. There's not a lot of great protections. Although J.R. Flores, is it Junior Flores? I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Asked early. What's that?
JR.
JR. So JR asked earlier, what about using either VDI in the cloud or some level of virtualness where the home user from home, their only real connection is to get to a cloud managed instance. And then that is the primary place where things are contained, where those secrets are, in fact. And yes, that's a fantastic way of managing some things. And in fact, how we manage a part of what we do from our home workers, it doesn't completely eliminate the issues, because if somebody can take over the launching point, that home desktop, they still can, keystroke monitor, gather passwords, potentially piggyback onto that connection. But it is a good way for this last piece, like, what does my external IP make me look like? It does manage that to a large degree.
Yeah.
So and a lot of these, security isn't a switch you turn on. It's usually boring part of security is it's a series of controls that actually make you less and less and less risky.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge Brad's question too, which we're going to get to a little bit later, which is, how do you get workers at home to care about this other than stomping your feet and yelling at them? So that wasn't word for word the question, but I read it. So, but we'll get there in a little bit. But
we'll talk about it.
But Mike, other folks had asked about physical security, and so I want to get here, and then we'll come back to that. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah. In fact, I was just seeing some physical security questions popping up. We do think about this. For much of my young life, I was in a tiny town in Oregon, population of 600, and it's still about the same. People did not lock their doors. There wasn't a good reason to. You could go trick-or-treating actually by leaving the front door of your house and just wandering around. The world has changed a bit since I was a child. Most people do lock their doors. If you have a work computer at home, we probably need to talk about a little bit more than making sure your doors are locked when you're leaving or when that computer is exposed. And in fact, that physical security policy for a work from home computer should be explicit and written down and agreed to. Here, quick poll, people online, does your policy from work talk about when you can and cannot leave the computer unattended? For example, in the trunk of your car. If you're traveling, it's either with you in your rental car or maybe in a hotel room.
Ooh, so you're getting sort of a half and half here. Half yes, half no.
Mixed responses. And another aspect I would love to know is a
By
lot
the way,
of remote workers.
Elise, I love the answer. Not yet. Sorry, go ahead.
Somebody's hastily typing into a Word document at this moment.
Elise, go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, it's fine. I would also highly recommend addressing the use of things that will mitigate security measures like the automatic screen locking and timing out of the screen. Many remote workers will probably not admit to this, but they will use devices that are designed to keep them shown as active in activity monitoring that their managers or supervisors have access to. So they will purchase devices such as these little mouse jigglers on Amazon and connect those to their computers to make sure that they show as available. Meanwhile, they have left their computer, everything is unlocked, all the applications are open and likely running in an environment that is absolutely not secured or controlled by the company that owns the device.
Yeah, there's cool newish technologies in that space, like since we all have a camera in front of us today. Brand new Subaru a friend just bought actually watches the driver to see if they are sleepy. I'm seeing that applied actually to that very scenario. Are you actually sitting in front of the computer? Are you there as a person? But there's a lot of things done well. A company cares about whether a laptop is stolen, but they care because they just lost maybe $1,000 or $2,000 because it's at rest, full disk encrypted. And we'll talk a little bit about at rest versus not at rest here in a moment too, because that is an important distinction. It is not at rest if you're logged in. It's often not technically at rest if it's turned on.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is able to steal a laptop that is still on, that's a different there's a different mode than stealing a laptop that's actually been fully powered down. And that's in the checklist, by the way, or should still be. So bad things happen: burglary, fire, comet strike. When those if your home is burgled and they take all of the computers, because 99.9 something percent of the time they're after the value of the computer, not the value of the data on the computer.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally that's not the case. Somebody's going to be calling their insurance. You as a homeowner, the company's involved. Work that out in advance. You don't want to have to deal with it while an event is happening. So somebody should also call the police, unless it's a comet strike. The police will already know about that. Whose incident response plan is activated when that occurs? We are specialists in incident response. We know how to do this. We're very good at it. Our company has great policy around this. In our case, for our employees, we're going to dive into incident response if there's a break-in a home of one of our employees. But we really can't prevent other parties from also raising their hand and saying our incident response also has a play here. Work that out before it's a battle. So, other kind of standard security controls. Does your policy describe what direction the screen is pointed at? If you can actually see my real background. This is not a fake one. There's no windows back there at all. In fact, my computer always faces a wall with no visibility beyond that. Windows are bad from both directions. Actually, people can see through them. And at night, of course, if you've got the inside lit and the outside not lit, everybody can see your screen through your camera because of optics. Clean desk policy, somebody raised earlier. Do you have a clean desk policy? Is it something that you're asking people to enforce at home? Is there paper that they have on their desks that has secrets of the company that are really just laying around for the cat to do cat things on, or far worse? And a lot of clean desk policies also include when you're not using your computer, if you've left the desk, turn it off, put it in a locked drawer. I'm not saying every one of these controls is for everyone. I'm saying that each of these reduces your risk and something to think about, at least broadly. Alith, anything to throw in on the physical controls policies?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't intend for this to be security awareness training, but I will say having the policy is important. Having that policy clearly described for and delivered to employees is important. Simply having an employee attest to a sheet of paper that they have read it is insufficient. So ensure that you have security awareness training that reflects your policies, that accurately and adequately communicates those policies to especially a remote workforce and this sampling of folks that we're talking about, but your entire organization, because all of us are working remotely in some capacity. Most of us have the ability to get our company email on our cell phones. There's no one that is immune to this policy at this point, I don't think. I'm sure people will correct me if I'm wrong, but have everyone clearly understand this and reattest and retrain at least annually.
And by the way, one thing I want to add there is, I was talking to an IT director who had the problem that Austin brought up. How do you enforce work from home policies? Thing Alith brought up, just doing one thing is not enough. Nobody's going to remember that thing they signed in January. I did talk to somebody who was doing, a phishing as a service thing, and not one, where you send out clickbait and then the employees who click it get you shouldn't have clicked that thing, which is a service that we help some folks with. And I was talking to one person, and they said, doing that and doing it right, where it doesn't feel like you're really getting punished, but just the idea of doing that keeps security top of mind, and is much more effective than sign this policy once a year.
Some of
yeah.
us, myself included, absolutely learn the hard way, and I would 100% encourage organizations to take advantage of situations where employees have the opportunity to fail with zero negative impact to the organization. I think it's best when coupled with security awareness training as a means of measuring the improvement of the security culture in the organization over time. Um, but it is a fantastic tool to keep folks alert and engaged, and a level of awareness that isn't completely paranoid, but also isn't so relaxed that by August we're just like leaving everything open to the universe.
I do want to quickly dive into that. How do you enforce? And enforce is an important term here. Work from home policy at home. You can't really. I mean, we do in a very interesting way for SOC. If you're work from home SOC, and you have access to very, very, very sensitive data, there will have been a video walkthrough of your environment by the SOC manager that is repeated if your background changes for no apparent reason. So we're in that way, we're trying to keep an eye on some of those physical parameters. You can't always enforce every security control that you have. There is the carrot, which is you get to keep working at a company that doesn't get compromised. Maybe a few other carrots that I'm not thinking of, but the stick is violations of policy are important, and if we detect a violation, there's a conversation to be had there. It can't always be about that negative thing, which is what Alith was just talking about. It's about, a well-run company is making sure that those employees are aware of policy and able to comply. Able to comply meaning they understand it and they get the reasons behind it, and they're able to comply because it's something they choose to do.
I want to pull something out of the chat. People are mentioning email phish pretexts that I would classify as A, highly unethical, and B, absolutely useless in the context of a security awareness training program and measuring the capabilities of that program. You really want to focus, and this I know is a tangent, I will get off my soapbox here in a moment, but you really want to focus on empowering your staff to defend against social engineering by understanding the psychology, not simply tricking them into clicking on some clickbaity thing. So yes, I think attackers don't have any ethical boundaries, but phishing absolutely should, because you don't want to make an enemy of your security team with the rest of your staff.
Cool. And I'm going to move us ahead here so we can spend some time at the end on the checklist. So Mike, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I'll dive in. Something near and dear to my heart, because I've done a lot of research into this, actually interesting AI type stuff. Man-in-the-middle attacks are an important way that people get access to secrets. And those secrets include things like passwords and actual data that you don't want them to have. But it's also a way of gaining control. It's a way of controlling the information that's flowing from and to you. The internet at large actually makes man-in-the-middle attacks kind of difficult. There's a bunch of pen testers on the call who are going to say, "Oh my God, no, I do this all the time." Yes, you do. You're extremely specialized, and even when you do, it's still a little bit of a challenge. Hopefully, most of the time. Actually, and because the act of getting in the middle on the internet can be hard. The way most people do it, the way they get in the middle, is by taking over the endpoints. And I would argue that's not in the middle. That is control of an end. In a work from home environment, though, there's that big middle. If you remember the diagram, there's you over here on your island and you're natting, but all your traffic is traveling through an untrusted network to get to a severely untrusted network. The interesting bit about that is the severely untrusted network doesn't have a lot of bad actors with access to hardware that can packet capture, right? Once it gets to your ISP, between that ISP and the other end, it's not simple to take over a real piece of hardware that can truly get in the middle and capture and deal with things. But your teenager can, right? That anybody occupying that home network space and maybe malware that's on their systems directly has access to the traffic that you're receiving and transmitting across that network. And, so there are obvious controls that we put in place there. Encrypt it, maybe VPN. Again, I think a lot of these come up in our checklist, but use a VPN from your your workstation at home, such that it moves you to a different source IP and encrypts every single thing that happens between you and that VPN endpoint. So let's see. I think I probably talked through most of these bullet items. Yeah, I think we can move on. Here's another one that I think is mostly Aleth's. I generated this slide, but I think a lot of the stuff in it is all about the work that you do with us. Briefly, and I'm going to turn it over. Briefly, if I want to catch you at your worst moment in order for you to make a mistake and give me access to your system, I try early in the morning. I try late at night. I try at times when I believe you will be distracted, or in other words, not your best self.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I share this story a lot, and it is humbling and somewhat embarrassing, but I used to work for a giant wireless company that I will now fondly refer to as the Death Star. And I had a scammer who spoofed the number of the customer support line, the 800 number for that same company that I'd previously been employed by. And when I answered the phone, it sounded completely correct. The number on the caller ID looked right. The individual sounded like they were in a call center that was offshore, which is completely the way that this company handles those things. And it was early in the morning. I was maybe like 3 sips into my cup of coffee on a Monday, getting through the email inbox. And they said, "Hey, we've got great news. We're going to give you this credit on your bill. We just need to confirm the 4 digits of your PIN on your account." And I was like, "Of course, it's 1234." And they're like, "Fantastic, we'll get that credit on your bill right away." And I hung the phone up and went, "What?"
Oh
And so
no.
luckily I realized there's something not right about this. And so I was able to call the actual customer support people, change my PIN number. They made fun of me, but there was no negative impact to me ultimately. And the scammers actually called back because they said that the PIN was wrong and they needed me to correct that for them so that they could add that credit to my bill, at which point I told them how I felt about what they did. And it was at that point that I was like, what is this? And how can I avoid ever falling victim to this again and feeling like I got, had one put over on me? And that's when I started learning about social engineering. It just takes the right combination of distractions, stressors, anxiety, to make us completely bypass all of the logical, analytical things that our brain should do to evaluate a request for a threat. And having, children, pets, delivery people, confusion, stress about, especially in the earlier parts, having to facilitate learning and childcare and work and find time to respond to emails and get on phone calls and create professional sounding work environments. All of this deeply impacted people and continues to impact a number of people, especially now that kids are out for summer break, which makes things like working from home super fun. So in general, how do you define your space? If you're not able to be in a separate room, how do you create a space that is for work? How do you get into the mental place where you can focus on work and do work things and follow work-related requirements and rules? And if that means you only work at one desk, or maybe you read your email when you first get up, but you don't necessarily respond to it right away until you've had time to fully process those things, get everyone breakfast, feed pets, take them outside for a walk, then go to your actual work computer and respond to those emails. It makes you a much more hardened target if you take the time to thoroughly evaluate something. I am somebody who is definitely guilty of this, but smooth is fast, and just taking things slow is going to make it much more likely that you don't make a mistake, have a typo in an email, click on an email or a link that you shouldn't, etc. So we'll move on to when you can be at your best. And Mike, go ahead and take it away.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, Elise, you were actually covering a lot of this there, which is, threat actors are looking for tired folks, people, that aren't paying it. This is my favorite slide Mike did, because that looks like a picture of my house. But, when everybody was in their office, it's a lot harder to get people who are, who haven't had their coffee yet. By the way, I have a rule that I no longer take meetings before coffee. They're looking for people who are less likely, to be that person, or more likely to be that person. So, I think, this is pretty clear to the folks here, which is, once you have that security mindset at work, you're in a better spot. I want to move us ahead so we can get to the checklist here. There are benefits to work from home, right, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, so these are kind of in a lot of ways minor benefits, but they're real. Access to assets that would be automatic if you were actually sitting on the corporate network, where it's like, oh, I'm sitting here, and so I can see the file server, and I can see maybe we haven't internally partitioned your corporate network as well as you ought to. I can see the accounting file server, even though I'm not in accounting. Maybe all of those things typically go away in a work from home environment, because you're making very deliberate choices about what that home worker sees. So that partitioning that everybody was raising their hands 10 years ago and saying you should do on your corporate network tends to happen as a side effect of work from home, and that home worker getting specific rules applied to them as they enter the network. So that can be actually a positive. I mean, when you do have access, frankly, it's slower. You don't have full gigabit throughput or 10 gig throughput from you to that asset. So that the fact that you're occasionally, maybe saying bad words towards your ISP because things are a bit slow can, oddly enough, help here a little bit. Malware isn't able to encrypt a giant pile of files as fast. Encryption actually takes a lot of bandwidth because you have to take all the bytes and turn them into other bytes. So maybe not as rapid a propagation.
And so now the checklist. So we put this together. It's not everything, but this sort of gives you all, as we look at the folks who are here, right? This is more for you, the IT directors, the HIPAA compliance officers, the CIOs who are here, the IT consultants and security consultants. 3 areas here that we've covered: separation in employee devices and networks, encourage zero trust, and review or create policy and governance. And we're going to email this out to everybody. We might even put it in a non-PowerPoint form. But this gives you a checklist. So when you look through, your policies, and you look through what you're telling your employees, you can say, hey, after 2.5 years of sending people home, we've learned some stuff and we need to revisit this. Mike, Elise, do you want to add other things about the checklist?
Go, Elise. I've been talking.
Of course. No, only that, yes, this will be in a non-PowerPoint format with a lot more detail, and you will get a copy of it following this webinar. I would encourage everyone to go take a look at their policies first, then figure out how you're going to enforce those, and make sure that these policies align with those first 2 bubbles, that you're addressing things in great detail. I've seen organizations come to us for help with policies that still reference things like faxes and modems. So it's one of those things where a lot of us go, yep, that's done, they exist, it's fine. But our technology and this new work from home is here to stay idea, this means that we are looking at not just, third-party vendor risk management, but like 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th layers of potential threat to our organizations through, as Mike mentioned, school machines, children's devices, other family members' devices, other family members' work devices, our devices, all their vendors. The network is just endless.
Yeah,
And
and this is not by any stretch of the imagination comprehensive. It may not even be the best list. It's what we thought of that we try to be super careful about, just at the top of our heads, not literally off the top of our heads. We did spend a little time at this, but but it's clearly your mileage is going to vary based on the org, the kinds of things you do, who else is involved, and so on. So um, that said, we're always open for questions and incoming. If you have questions about the checklist, if you have questions about what we presented, we'll be happy to answer those.
yeah, and so I want to go through a couple other things here, and I do want to answer that question that came up before because I'm not sure we've answered it, which is, if your home users are not into security other than using a phishing system, are there other ways to convince them? Before I do, since we're getting toward the end here, I do want to tell folks who don't know us what we do. So sort of two sides to the organization here. Managed Detection Response is the 24/7 SOC coverage, but we see it as including incident preparedness and active incident response. And for all of you who have endpoints on those, we can watch the endpoints that you have on the home devices. And then on the right side, the strategic program development. So that's vCISO work, policy work. We can help you with your work from home policies, of course. Phishing is a service we talked about. Social engineering, Elise does that. The vulnerability scanning, gap analysis, and risk assessments. So, some really, important things we do. Now, two things. Number one is two of my colleagues are going to put links in the chat. And yes, we recognize the irony of putting a link in the chat in a security webinar. But one of them is the survey. We really appreciate when folks take the survey. Also, for every survey that's completed, you get a choice of getting a gift card for completing it, or you can donate it to Girls Who Code, which we can all agree is a great organization. We need more women in security. And so please take the survey. We'd really appreciate. Also, if anyone wants to talk about any of these services with us, a woman named Ellie is on our team. She's terrific, and she'll put her calendar link in the chat. Now, back to this. So, Mike, Elise, how do you tell people, who have non-security minded folks at home to care, to do this stuff, to be zero trust?
That's a really good question. And I, over the years, I have taken a few different stabs at that. And none of them are complete. None of them work entirely. What I would say is start with, here's how doing security well and keeping yourself secure benefits you personally. Because it's nice to show, hey, you know what, good practices and doing this well and just in general, taking care of your digital life benefits the company, of course, but it actually has a far greater benefit to you as a person. You're not dealing with identity theft, and you're not dealing with wiping your computer out and replacing it with a brand new one, and all of the kinds of things that are personal benefit. And the other is, I think, and this may be a little controversial, and it comes from the tech side of the house, so just ignore it if you feel like it. I feel like employees do better if they realize that they're being trusted with important things.
Yep.
That a part of the conversation is, we as a company are trusting you with very serious, important secrets that it's our shared responsibility to protect. If it's all about do these things because otherwise we're going to punish you, I just don't feel like that works as well as, hey, we're in this together. And a part of that is for us to share that responsibility.
Yeah. And so Elise, you can use this as your final thought because we're at the top of the hour. I just want to remind people those two links are safe. Jim scanned them in the chat. One is the survey. The other is if you want to talk to us, you can hit Ellie's meeting link and pick something on her calendar. Elise, final thoughts.
So my final thought is that is fantastic. You want to empower your employees to protect themselves, their own assets, their own money, and then they will carry that forward into your organization, and that philosophy will stay with them.
Awesome. Thank you, Elise. And thank you. Wow, you all have asked just terrific questions. And it is a joy to have you all at this event. Thank you so much for joining us. If your kids are either out of school or about to get out of school, I'm sorry, I'm in the same situation. But school will come back soon. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Mike, Elise, thank you on behalf of everyone at Critical Insight. We appreciate you being here. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.